Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our last and final discussion about the Reformation, right? We are going to finish up our entire discussion and our analysis of the Reformation period in Europe that is going to rage on in Europe from about 1500 to 1648. Now, we could go into a lot more depth, but we're not going to do that right now because it's really not that necessary as this is a survey course and we're trying to move expeditiously. But the stuff that we are going to talk about today is going to be very important for understanding the reactions to the Reformation and the effects of the Reformation for later units, okay? So the stuff that we're about to talk about today is you're going to be referencing this in like Unit 5 and Unit 6 and a couple other different units as well, because we're going to keep coming back to this one new denomination of Christianity that's going to get started, and we're also going to keep coming back to the Catholic Church after the Reformation and see kind of how it's all been affected by it, right? But the last place that we left off in class before we go into this really nice and short holiday flip, which I'm expecting to be like around or under 15 minutes, is going to be, or where we left off in class, we were analyzing the Anglican Church, right? And before that, we were analyzing the movements of Martin Luther, right? So just so we can remember how the entire Reformation went, Martin Luther begins his movement in 1517, and on October 31st, 1517, writes the 95 Theses, begins the process of the Reformation, eventually creates the faith known as Lutheranism while he's on the run in the Holy Roman Empire. And then the Reformation ideals are going to spread all the way over to England, and you're going to see Henry VIII create the Anglican Church, right, as he's trying to get a divorce and he's trying to have a son, right? Now, going into it, though, what we're now going to see, though, is one other denomination of Christianity pop up. We are going to see another guy show up in Switzerland this time, and he is actually going to create a whole new branch of Christianity that is going to really have some major impacts going forward, all right? And his name is John Calvin. Now, before we even start the discussion about him, we need to understand one key thing. He is French, all right? So now, he is actually French. He is from France, but he is going to be exiled to Switzerland after some little events that go down that actually result in the threatening of his death, all right? So what basically ended up happening in France is he originally was, just like all these guys were, a Catholic priest, right? He was originally a Catholic official, and he actually was very, very close to the faith, but he starts going against it and being like, the church is not being ran effectively. Sound familiar? And what's going to end up happening is this one big event known as the Affair of the Placards, where all these posters showed up overnight in France talking about, you're going to go to hell and the devil in the brow. And like basically just kind of threatening that basically, or like that France and the people of France were going down a bad path, right? And one of those posters actually even ended up on the King of France's bedroom door, right? Which is absolutely wild. Like, how did he get it there, right? So the thing we need to understand, though, is then the King of France, Francis the First, one of the later Valois kings, is going to put a warrant out for his death. Be like, I bet this was that John Calvin guy, right? And so rather than dying or being burned at the stake or being tortured or any of that stuff, Pierre, John Calvin then decides to run away to Switzerland, right? So he runs away to Switzerland, specifically to a place called Geneva, Switzerland, and he goes out there and he begins his new faith known as Calvinism, right? Now, Calvinism, okay, is going to be a very, very interesting faith and very different from the Anglican Church, which was like Diet Catholic, and then also the Lutheran Church, okay? Because it's going to have very strict sets of rules, all right? Now, Calvinists, okay, first and foremost, got to understand two key things about them. One, they do believe in a concept known as predestination, okay? Which we're going to get to that here in a couple of seconds, but just know it going into it before we actually explain it. And they also believe in a very, very strict moral code, okay? So something you have to understand about Calvin's Geneva that he started, he wrote this book on the Institutes of Christian Religion, and he literally kind of outlined the idea of a faith where only a handful of people were getting into heaven, right? He believed that only the elect were going to be going to heaven, and he believed the elect were the ones that were following him. Now, with that being of the elect class, they believed in a lot of very strict things that guided their daily life. And they also believed in an idea where the church and the laws of the land were kind of intertwined together. So basically, you could get in trouble in a Calvinist community for violating some of these really strict moral rules, right? So go ahead and jot down a couple of things that were outlawed in Calvinist communities, because that will pop up on your next test. But things that were actually outlawed in Calvinist communities were like wearing bright colors, right? You were only supposed to wear black and white. Other things that were outlawed were dancing, like in the streets, singing really loudly, playing games on a Sunday, right? Oh, and also church attendance was strictly required, all right? Alcohol was also outlawed in these places. Theaters were outlawed in these places. And basically anything that might distract from the presence of God, right? Decks of playing cards were outlawed in Calvinist communities because they were against gambling, right? So you have to understand that they have a very strict moral code. Basically, they're just anti-fun, right? They're just very, very much against fun. And so what's going to end up going down though is that, surprisingly enough, this Calvinist idea is going to continue to spread, right? And you're going to see a lot of different types of Calvinists pop up, including some people that you actually just might have actually kind of interacted with slightly over the holiday. The Pilgrims, right? The Pilgrims of the United States that founded the Plymouth colony are going to be a type of Calvinists that are called Puritans, right? And so that whole entire thing, when you think about a Pilgrim, they're usually wearing black and white, and they're a little smiley, but typically they were actually not very smiley because they never got to do anything or have a good time. So, going into it, though, like I was saying, church attendance was strictly required, but all of this stuff revolves around the concept of predestination, because you have to understand something really key about Calvinism is they don't believe in free will. All right, so now they do not believe that the concept of free will truly exists, because they believe that God knows that you are going to go to heaven or hell before you are even born. They believe that God knows every single thing that you will ever choose to do, think about doing from here to now, in the past and forward, in perpetuity, all the time, right? And so they really don't believe in the concept of free will, and they believe that by following that strict moral code and being a Calvinist, it means that you're a part of that elect group, and you must stay within those rules to stay a part of the elect, right? Now, the thing about Calvinism, though, is we are going to talk about them a lot later on, so do me a favor, highlight that little section or put a star next to it, okay? Now, the next thing we need to understand about, though, is going to be a major movement known as the Catholic Reformation or the Counter Reformation, okay? One or the other, you can call it either one you want. It really is up to you. So what you need to understand, though, that's going to happen is during the 1500s, the Catholic Church is going to go through a series of soul searching, you could call it, right? Like sessions where they're going to look inward and they're going to be like, hey, was it a very smart idea for us to let those popes run around unregulated that entire time? Was it a very smart idea for us to sell indulgences, right? Was it a good idea? Probably not. And the Catholics are going to actually start looking inward at their own church and start trying to figure out ways where they can actually revamp the church and rework it and outlaw some things to actually make it appeal more to the people of Europe and to stop the movement of the Reformation from losing so many followers, right? And so what the Counter-Reformation is going to be, which is going to be a movement that starts right around 1645 and is believed to end right around, 1545, and is believed to actually end right around the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648. You have to understand that it's going to be a series of reforms, right? Where the Catholics are going to call the Council of Cardinals together, and they're going to start trying to figure out what should we do to change the church to make it better in the modern, or not in the modern era, but in the 1500s, right? And so the meeting that is going to be called, and this meeting is going to be called several different times over 100-year-long period, is known as the Council of Trent, right? Do me a favor, highlight that word, the Council of Trent, right? Which is a group of cardinals and papal officials and the Pope himself to get together to fix Catholicism, to address the issues that the Protestants had with them, right? Because you have to understand the bedrock core of this entire thing is these Protestant reformers like John Calvin, like Martin Luther, like Henry VIII, all had issues with not Henry VIII as much, he was just literally a little baby, but the thing they had issues with the church and the way it was being run. So literally, the Catholic Church is going to begin to address them and try to fix them, right? Now, going into this, you're going to see a lot of different changes, including priest training, which is going to actually try and really focus in on making sure that every single priest and parish priest throughout all of Europe can speak Latin, can do the job efficiently, and can officiate Mass well, right? And this is also going to include a lot of oversight, which is actually the idea of making sure they continue to do that job and do it well. They are also going to outlaw the selling of indulgences, right? They are going to literally ban this permanently, because several different popes throughout a large period of history had actually condoned the selling of indulgences and practiced it and propagated it, including Julius II, Leo X, and a multitude of others, right? Now, what's going to end up happening, though, is Pope Paul III is going to come in. I love Pope Paul III. I think he's very, very funny. So he's going to come in, and he's going to be like, no, all right, we are done with that. We are not selling those anymore. It is not okay. It is not smart, and it wasn't a good thing when they did it in the first place. So they get outlawed and banned completely. They are also going to begin to bring women in to actually work to help educate people, right? And to also start opening up some of the very first Catholic schools. And nuns and convents will actually be some of the people that run and officiate those. So you could argue that Chapelle is a byproduct of the Counter-Reformation, right? Also, though, interesting thing that some of you might be like, well, Mr. Chari, is the Inquisition going to be kept around? That scary church court that used to torture people and burn them at the stake? That's a great question. And yes, it will be, right? The Inquisition is actually going to stay a present thing, all right? So, like now, which is that church court that actually fought Protestantism and heresy, okay? So they didn't get rid of that, which is a little bit of a downside of the Counter-Reformation. But another thing that's going to happen, though, is several new orders are going to be established. Now, really, really quickly, under order, what I need you to do is just like a little arrow underneath it, just so you can know what the word order means. What a new order is it's a new group of monks or nuns, right? It's a new group of priests and nuns, or sisters and brothers, or whatever, all right? It's a new group of, like, a specific order, all right? For example, one of the most famous ones that's going to be started is going to be known as the Ursuline nuns. Are going to be started after the Counter-Reformation, and the Ursuline nuns focused on charity, giving health, right, and actually trying to actually heal people and stuff like that, and then also education, hence why the Ursuline Academy actually exists in New Orleans. And the other very, very famous order that is going to be started after the Counter-Reformation is one known as the Jesuits, right? So yeah, the Jesuits are going to be started by a man by the name of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, right? Now, the thing about it, though, that the Jesuits are going to actually do, that you need to understand, is they're also going to focus on education and spreading the faith to new parts of the world, because something that's going on in the background of all this stuff right now that y'all don't even realize is that the Europeans are beginning to actually interact and encounter new areas of the world that they had never encountered before, right? They have now figured out that North and South America are there. They're now realizing that large island chains and what is now known as Polynesia is there, right? So what's going on is that the Jesuits are also going to try to spread Catholicism to those new areas, okay? Now, the interesting thing about the Jesuits, though, that you can relate it to in your brain is the Jesuit high school in the area, right? And all of us know that they have those hideous uniforms where they look like zookeepers, right? Well, the reason why is because the man who founded the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola, was actually in the military, right? He was in the military, and he actually tried to create this new order to function much like a military unit, because what had happened was he actually was wounded in battle, right? And so this guy, St. Ignatius of Loyola, was hit in the leg by a shrapnel burst or a cannon shot, right, in his leg, and he was laid up for several weeks, right? And so literally while he sat there healing in his bed, he found himself like more connected to God, and he started doing a spiritual workout where he basically all but memorized the entire the entire Bible by doing like certain sets of psalms every single day, or like reciting it or rehearsing it or going over it over and over and over again. And so he actually approached Catholicism much like the military approaches everything, with strict discipline and a code of conduct, right? And so that is going to be something that's very important to them, and that's why Jesuit boys are always getting these things called penance halls, or getting in trouble, or why they have to have their hair cut short, or their shoes have to look nice, and their shirt must be tucked in, and they have to look very, very nice, okay? Because that is the essence of the Jesuit order, right? Is that they emphasize that military-like organization, discipline, and obedience to the Pope, and they also emphasize education. And they're going to travel the world spreading Christianity, like we said. But that right there is we're going to be ending this flip. That is all for this entire thing. It's about 15 minutes where we talked about the effects of the Reformation, and I'll see y'all soon, and we're going to be talking about some stuff that some of y'all might know a little bit of stuff about going into our next class. But I'll see y'all tomorrow, or Monday. Y'all have a great rest of your break.